They called it a mission of civilization, a return to empire, a chance for Italy to finally sit among Europe's great powers. But Africa would not be conquered quietly. At the end of the 19th century, European empires were carving up the continent like a feast. Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, and Italy, desperate to prove it belonged, turned its eyes toward the Horn of Africa. Ethiopia, an ancient kingdom that had never been colonized, a nation with its own emperors, armies, and identity. Italy believed it would fall easily. They were wrong. Ethiopia was not like other African territories. For over 1,000 years, it had resisted foreign domination. It had defeated invaders, preserved its sovereignty, and maintained diplomatic ties with Europe itself. By the 1890s, Emperor Menelik II ruled a unified Ethiopia. His army was massive, well-armed, and fiercely loyal. Italy, however, believed Ethiopia had already submitted. In 1889, the Treaty of Wuchale was signed. The Italian version claimed Ethiopia had agreed to become an Italian protectorate. The Amharic version said something very different. Menelik rejected Italy's interpretation. Italy chose war. Italy sent thousands of troops into northern Ethiopia. They expected a quick victory, a symbolic conquest, a colonial trophy. Instead, they marched into the highlands toward a small town called Adwa. Ethiopian forces gathered from every corner of the empire. Farmers became soldiers, priests became strategists, women supplied weapons and intelligence. Over 100,000 Ethiopians mobilized. Italy brought modern rifles and artillery. Ethiopia brought unity, terrain knowledge, and the will to defend their land. March 1st, 1896. The sun rose over the Ethiopian highlands. By sunset, history had changed. Italian troops were outmaneuvered, surrounded, and crushed. Entire regiments collapsed, commanders were captured, thousands were killed or taken prisoner. For the first time in modern history, an African army had defeated a European colonial power in open battle. Adwa was not just a victory. It was a message. Africa was not weak. Africa was not helpless. Africa could fight back. News of Adwa spread across the globe. In Europe, it was humiliation. In Africa and the black diaspora, it was inspiration. Ethiopia became a symbol of resistance, a beacon of pride. But Italy never forgot the defeat, and it never forgave it. For decades, the dream of revenge simmered beneath Italian politics, waiting for the right leader, the right moment. That moment came with Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini rose to power in the 1920s, a fascist dictator obsessed with rebuilding the Roman Empire. To him, Ethiopia was unfinished business, a stain on Italy's pride. He promised to avenge Adwa, to erase the memory of Italian defeat, and to crush Ethiopian independence once and for all. In 1935, Italian forces invaded again. This time, the war would not be fair, it would not be honorable, and it would not spare civilians. Italy brought more than guns. They brought planes, bombs, and poison. Mustard gas rained from the sky. Villages were burned, water sources were contaminated, civilians were targeted deliberately. Men, women, children. International law banned chemical weapons. Italy used them anyway. This was not war, it was terror. By 1936, Italian troops entered Addis Ababa. Ethiopia's capital fell. Mussolini declared victory. He claimed Ethiopia was now part of a new Italian empire. But resistance never stopped. Guerrilla fighters, known as the Arbegnyoch, the Patriots, continued to fight from the mountains. They sabotaged supply lines, attacked outposts, refused to surrender. Italy responded with brutality. In February 1937, Ethiopian resistance fighters attempted to assassinate the Italian viceroy. Italy's response was merciless. For 3 days, Addis Ababa burned. Civilians were hunted in the streets. Homes were torched. Thousands were executed without trial. This became known as Yekatit 12, one of the worst massacres in Ethiopian history. The world looked away. What Italy did in Ethiopia was not unique. They had practiced this violence before in Libya. Italy invaded Libya in 1911, promising development, promising modernization. Instead, they brought forced labor, land seizures, and mass repression. Entire communities were displaced. Nomadic tribes were confined to camps. Resistance fighters were executed publicly. Libya became a laboratory of colonial cruelty. Libyan resistance had a leader. His name was Omar Mukhtar, a teacher, a strategist, a symbol of defiance. For over 20 years, he led guerrilla attacks against Italian forces, using the desert as his shield and faith as his strength. Italy could not defeat him in battle, so they captured him and executed him publicly in 1931. They hoped fear would end resistance. It did not. To break Libyan resistance, Italy built concentration camps. Entire tribes were relocated. Thousands died from starvation, disease, and abuse. This was collective punishment, genocide by policy. Yet these crimes remain largely forgotten. Italy's colonial crimes were buried under silence. No major trials, no accountability. Textbooks softened the truth. Museums avoided the horror, but the scars remain. In Ethiopia, in Libya, in African memory. Adwa was more than a battle. It was proof that empire could be resisted, that Africa could defend itself. That colonial power was not invincible. Ethiopia's victory echoed across generations, from Harlem to Johannesburg, from Accra to Kingston. Adwa inspired freedom movements everywhere. When Italy unleashed chemical weapons on Ethiopian villages, the world knew. Journalists reported it. Doctors documented the burns. Survivors told their stories. Yet the League of Nations did almost nothing. Sanctions were weak. Protests were symbolic. Justice never came. European powers feared confronting Mussolini more than they cared about African lives. Ethiopia was sacrificed to politics. After World War II, the world focused on Europe's suffering, the Holocaust, the bombed cities, the fallen empires. But Africa's story was pushed aside. Italy was never forced to fully answer for its crimes in Ethiopia or Libya. No major trials, no global reckoning. The victims were forgotten, not because their suffering was smaller, but because their voices were silenced. In 1941, with British support, Ethiopia reclaimed its independence. Emperor Haile Selassie returned to Addis Ababa. The Italian Empire in East Africa collapsed, but the scars remained. Poisoned land, destroyed villages, generations traumatized by occupation. Freedom came, but justice never did. Libya's suffering did not end with Italy's departure. Decades of instability followed. Borders drawn by colonizers created fragile nations. Economic exploitation left deep wounds. But Libyans never forgot Omar Mukhtar, never forgot the camps, never forgot the resistance. Their history lives in memory, not textbooks. Colonial brutality is not ancient history. It shapes borders, economies, power. It explains why some nations struggle to recover, why wealth is unevenly distributed, why Africa's resources enriched Europe, while Africans paid the price. To understand today's world, we must confront yesterday's violence. Some still claim Italian colonialism was less violent, more civilized, more humane. The evidence says otherwise. Mustard gas, mass executions, concentration camps, genocide. There was nothing gentle about empire. Adwa became a symbol beyond Ethiopia. It inspired Pan-African movements, black liberation struggles. Anti-colonial revolutions, from Marcus Garvey to Kwame Nkrumah. From Harlem to Nairobi, Adwa proved that resistance was possible. One African victory reshaped global consciousness. When history is erased, oppression survives. Remembering is an act of resistance. Telling the truth is a form of justice. Ethiopia remembers. Libya remembers. Africa remembers. Silence protects the powerful. Truth empowers the oppressed. For too long, African suffering was excluded from global memory, but history does not disappear. It waits to be told. This is why we tell these stories. Not to dwell on pain, but to honor resilience, to challenge lies, to restore dignity. Africa's past deserves truth, undiluted, unfiltered, unforgotten. Empires fall, but memory endures. And as long as these stories are told, Africa's spirit remains unconquered. If this hidden history moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications.